Hi there, this is RK Photographic and welcome to the basic introduction to Lightroom. In this short podcast we'll have a run through on how a photographer can use Lightroom for the first time as part of their basic workflow. In doing this we'll have a quick look at the import functionality and how you bring your photos in. We'll have a look at the library and how you organise your photos. We'll have a look into the develop module where you'll do most of your editing, and we'll have a quick look at the map modules where you can map your photos to make geotagging and locational finding of them much easier. Okay, so we'll kick off. Okay, so the first thing you do when you get your photos back or you've returned from a trip is you actually pop your photos from the memory card straight on to your chosen storage device, so whether that be your hard drive of your computer or laptop or an external hard drive attached to your PC. I'd always advise using an external drive and at least having one backup of it in case of hard drive failure. And I'd also always advise moving your files onto your PC or onto the external drive before you do the import. It allows you to work with your folder structure and set it up as you choose. It's a lot easier than allowing Lightroom to make the decision for you or having to go into the settings and make changes. Okay, so to import your files, you come down to the bottom left hand corner of Lightroom. We're in Lightroom 5 and you press the import button. And what will happen now is Lightroom will go away and it'll have a look at the files we've got available to us, and it will also point us to the last location where we went to. So currently I've already imported these files, so we don't need to do it again, but we could point it at any of our drives and actually have a look at photographs and import them. So I'll just run you through quickly. It also notices files that are already in, so it grays them out so you can't bring in them. As we see, we've got don't import suspected duplicates ticked. And once we've selected all the ones we want, we can add keywords separated by the semicolon to help us with our tagging. And then we click the import. And we can keyword in batches again, so if you've got files from say Staithes and Whitby and Robin Hood's Bay and the Moors, you could select multiple files, say 5, 10, however many you want from one location, add your keywords, select the others, add separate keywords. It's a really good way of managing your files and being able to find them afterwards. So we will now assume that we have selected some files when we click imported, so we're going to cancel on this for now and we'll go back into our library module. Now, this is where the photos that come in to Lightroom actually appear. If we go to previous import, that shows us the files that we imported last. The other option here is to go to all photographs and that shows us everything we've got in Lightroom. The other excellent thing we can do here is we've got an option under collections here, is we can add collections and smart collections. So as well as them being categorized on our hard drive, we can create a smart collection based on tags, based on camera types, based on photos we select, and we can ensure that our photos are actually organized in Lightroom in a different way. So one photo could appear in multiple collections. So you could, photo here for example, could easily appear in both seascapes, in North Yorkshire, and there's two collections for you that you've got, a different way of finding photos. So it's great when you've got the certain mind to come and process certain photographs of a certain style. You can find them really easy this way. Anyway, so we're not going to start a collection right now. I'm just going to work with the files I've got. So I'm currently working on all photographs, so you can see this has got my photos plus the photos we imported during the residential workshop in North Yorkshire last week. Okay, so the first thing we do when we've got a file is we decide which one we want to edit. There are a number of things we can do. We can actually rate them as well. So it's sometimes really nice to actually have a look through your files that you've imported and work out which ones you want to edit and actually add a star rating to them to tell us that this is a photo we want to do something with. If we hover over any picture, if you see the little adjustments next to it, we can actually see what work has been done on a photograph already. So again, it's really helpful to help us to see that we've actually worked on certain photographs already. So I'm going to pick one that we've not worked on for now. So I'm going to pick this file, I'll double click it, that brings it into full screen in the library mode. Now within your library mode, if we have a look down, you have got some settings that you can work with to start with, but we'll just have a quick look at the top. The histogram represents the spread of colour and light tones across the image. You'll be used to seeing that on your camera, and it will replicate that. It also gives us some information, so the ISO we took the image at, the focal distance, the aperture, and the amount of time we've had the shutter open for, so the shutter speed. If we hover over any of these, it gives us a tip. We've got some default settings we can apply very quickly. Tend not to use these very often. We can apply white balance from here. You notice if it's a RAW file, you get an awful lot of options, where if it's a JPEG file, you'll only get very limited. You'll get an auto, an as shot, and custom. We've got an ability to quickly auto tone. We've got an ability to quickly click through our exposure in a sort of one stop and third of a stop increments. We can add more keywords in here and build up our keyword library so we can apply keywords to a photo. We can encode our photo with metadata, so here we could put a title in, caption about it, copyright, so that's all. I always encourage people to put their contact details in, their name and at least an email address, so if you do post your pictures online, that people can quickly and easily, if they find a photo on the internet and want to use it under this government legislation on orphan images, they have to make reasonable attempts to actually contact the author. So if you put a name and an email address into your metadata, then although there are programs that can strip metadata out, that most sort of renowned and reputable companies will actually make an effort to contact you. So it does give you a chance to make a little bit of money from your photography along the way. You can put creator details in, you can add location, sublocation into there. Again, that's just more for your own peace of mind, and you can rate your photo. The label section here is where I tend to put my email address. And we notice here that we've got more details: capture time, the dimensions of the file, the ISO, the model, the camera, and the GPS section at the bottom, which is currently blank. But if we had a camera with GPS, it would add details into there. Or what we can do is, and we'll do this now quickly before we do any editing, we can flick over to the map module. And this is where Lightroom interacts with Google Maps. And we can search for any location. Now, I know this image was taken in Sands End, near Whitby. So I've typed in Sands End and it brings me up the location. So now I need to find out roughly where we took this image. So, and then once I've centered the map, I can zoom in and I can zoom out to place my photo on this map. Now I know we arrived parked at this car park here, came down the ramp onto the beach here, and we worked within this rough area here. Now, as I recall, the area with the interesting light on the beach and the quite a minimal look was somewhere in this area, but it doesn't have to be uber accurate, but as accurate as you want it to be. So it's a personal choice. So I'm gonna pop this photo on as being kind of roughly here. We right click on our mouse, which brings up the add GPS coordinates to select photos option. We then click on it. That'll encode that for us, and we'll see some GPS coordinates encoded into that photograph. So now if we go back to the library module, scroll all the way down to the bottom, and we'll see that GPS data is now encoded. And if you upload your pictures to the internet, services such as Flickr, you will notice that you can map your images and it will pick up this GPS coordinates and allow you to see it. represented on a map. Right, so we're now going to get into our basic editing routine. Now, what I'd sometimes do, and a lot of people are very snobby and don't like the auto buttons, but I will sometimes just have a look at the option for auto tone and just see what Lightroom does to the picture and see if it's something I like. Now, in this instance, maybe not exactly what I was going for, but that's the great thing about Lightroom. It's non-destructive. We can click Edit and Undo Tone. What I do tend to do before I start making any edits in the Develop module next is I tend to right click on the file and I'll go down and I'll create a virtual copy. This means we've always got that base file to return to with no edits on it. It's mapped, that's fine, we're not worried about that, but it's got no edits on it, so we can always return to that file. Now, as you see, there's some very other quick tools in here, but I don't tend to use them masses. If we click on them, you'll see what it does. 1 stop, 2 stops, 3 stops, brighter, 1 stop, 2 stop, 3 stops. Darker, doesn't really do a great deal. Refined in that sense, and you can go to edit at the top and decrease or undo steps if you want to. The other excellent thing we can do is if we look down the left hand side, once we're in the Develop module, we get the history bar, which allows us to see our edits. So what we're going to do now is going to go straight across to the Develop module, and in this sense Lightroom is very logical, very systematic. So if we look in our history, we can see the steps we've done already. The great thing is we've got an ability to reset that as well, so we can take that all the way back to a base image, and again if we fly over to here, we can see it doesn't reset the GPS coordinates, it's just resetting the editing. Now Lightroom tends to, for me, works very systematically and sequential. You tend to work your way sort of down this right hand panel, doing your adjustments pretty much in a very systematic order as it's laid out, and then there is some additional tools you can work on afterwards. Although that said, there is one caveat of one tool which Adobe have put in, which I feel should actually be further up and near the top. So if we scroll down and we go down to our lens corrections section, we'll notice in here in lens corrections we've got an option to do enable profile corrections and remove chromatic aberration. Now, chromatic aberration is that colour fringing that you get around the edges of contrast and lines in your image, and Lightroom will do a really good job of auto softening some of these to try and remove them for you if you tick that early, and it will edit that for you as you almost sort of live and on the fly. So I always tick that. The other one I tick is enable profile corrections. This is basically where the lens and camera manufacturers provide Adobe with information about their lens characteristics and any kind of barrel distortion, any vignetting that the lens may have inherent with it. And these corrections are then actually applied to your image, so it takes it back to a flat base image. Now, not all camera, and certainly some of the either the point and shoots or the bridge models, don't often have their characteristics in, so this might not work. So we'll tick it anyway. And the thing to do if you want to know if it's picked up, you click profile and you'll have a look in here, and it will auto fill this out. If you're unsure, you can have a look down through your camera manufacturers, and there we go, we've got a big old list of camera manufacturers there, and equally so under that there's a massive list of lenses per camera manufacturer. Let's say it doesn't have one for this camera, but not to panic. So we can then move back to the top of the list, and this is where we start moving in a very nice sequential order. And the first thing I tend to do is I look at setting the dynamic range on my image, and this to do this, rather than using contrast, which can be quite aggressive on the difference between the tones, I'll often set what we call the white and the black points. So that's kind of the deepest black and the whitest white, and you'll see the histogram stretch out along the bar. So what I tend to do is I press the Alt key before I do this, and this will, when we press our left click button on the whites, will send the screen black. This means that we move the slider without distraction of looking at detail, and when we see some light or white pixels or red appear as warnings, we know that we've got blown out highlights. So we move a slider to the right until we get some clipping. You can see the blues showing us that we've got some clip data, and then we just peel it back so they disappear. So that's set our white is white, and we do the same with black. So we press Alt and we click on the slider for the black. The screen goes white, so again we've not got the distraction of looking at the image, and we move to the left until we see some black start to appear. Now what I do like to see is a little bit more contrast, so I do leave some of these deep shadows in. But again, this can be personal choice. Now, depending on the mood we're trying to create, we might decide that this is, it might be not darker than we want it, it might be too bright, and this is where we can get creative using Lightroom, using both exposure and highlights and shadows. What I might try and do here as well is just look at the overall white balance, because this was taken in the very early part of the morning. There's certainly quite a lot of blue around. If we hover, take our colour picker from our white balance tool, what we tend to do is we hover over looking for what is in essence a neutral grey, or it's kind of like an 18% grey. It's not always possible to find one. And if you notice up on the left hand side up here, as we move around the picture, it shows us the effect that it's going to have on the image from the area that we pick. So if we go up here into the blues, it takes the tone of the image completely in the opposite direction. It warms it up. So if we look at a temp on here, it's took the colour temperature up and warmed it very slightly. And this might be what we're after in this instance, or we might want that morning coolness that was there. So we click undo white balance if we don't want it, and it's as simple as that. So I'm just going to take it once more, and I'm going to look for kind of a neutralish colour, because I do still like the blues. And what we can then do is, if we want to just add a little bit of warmth to it, we can warm it up manually. So without pushing it too far, I'm just going to add a little bit of warm, a little bit of magenta into there as well. Again, with any of the Lightroom sliders, you do need to be careful not to push them too far, as it can look forced. So I'm going to stop about here. It's just warm the sand up a little bit, add a little bit of kind of magenta in there, and then we can look at the image as a whole. Now, do we want it to be brighter? Is it going to be a high key image? Or do we want it to be darker? Or are we happy where it is? So what I might look is at the exposure, and I might raise it a little bit from quite a minimal image, just to make it that little bit brighter. Not too much. I tend to don't do too much in this sense with the exposure, and I probably won't touch the contrast. And here we've got the highlights. This is where we control specifically the highlight tones, and we can rein them back a little bit if we've got areas that we don't want quite as blown out. So if we click on the highlight slider, again, if we press Alt, this is the great thing, it blacks it out so we're able to see it without effective detail, and we can rein the highlights back left, or we can push them right. The good thing about pushing them right is you can actually brighten your highlights to a point where they get blown out, so you can then step back again when you see the blue warning marks appear, and we know that we've actually made the highlights brighter without actually blowing out detail. And with shadows, again, what we might want to do, we could darken it, or we might want to bring some extra light into the shadows if we're going for quite a high key image. But what we've got to be careful is of not changing the balance too much, as it might look a little bit forced. Any of these sliders in here, if you're not happy with what you've done, double click it on the actual point and it resets it to 0. As we can do the same on shadows, so we can press Alt, and as we move it left, we can then see warnings where we've clipped the shadows too much. So I'm going to just, in this instance, I'm going to be quite high key, so I'm going to raise it a little bit, not too much. So about 20 just to raise it a little bit. I'm going to be quite a high key on this image. The next thing we might want to do is look at our horizon and make sure we're actually got a straight image. So here we do dip upwards into the crop tool, and we've got a number of ways of doing this. If you get quite close in, just outside the picture itself, press your left mouse button. You see a very fine grid appear, so we can kind of move it up or down with the mouse just to try and line that horizon up. Once we're happy with it, we press the enter key or we click done. The other way we could do it, if we see this ruler tool here, we click on that, and if you've got a nice strong solid horizon, click on the left hand side, left mouse button, follow the line all the way across to the right, and it levels it again based on your settings. We're going to be happy with that. What we could also do maybe is crop at this point if we really wanted to, and then again that's something we can also do in here. And if you have a look here, we've got a number of options. The padlock means that the aspect ratio is locked, so if we grab the top or the side and bring it in or expand it, it will actually keep the proportions of the image. If we uncheck that, we can actually move them independently and change the actual constraint or proportion of the image. Also under original here, we've got some settings, quick settings, so we might want a square. In this sense, what I want to do if I'm using a square is I really like this kind of semi-blurry person here, and I like the way these lines lead. So it's making sure that we get the area of focus in the image that we want. So what I'm going to do on this instance is just bring the I'm going to go with the square, move it over here, and I'm quite happy with that. I've got the person in the frame, I've got these lovely lines in the gravel, and I've got this lovely patch of water and light in the sky, and I think we're happy with that. So we'll move down. So we've done a lot of our basic editing. Then we can go and look at the presence, and this is where we can kind of work with micro contrast and micro sort of warmth and saturation on the image. Now clarity is where we work with micro contrast, but what we've got to be really mindful of is being very careful. It can be quite a destructive tool. So if I grab it now, drag it all the way to the right, you'll see how initially you go, wow, look at the detail in that, but actually it's very, very aggressive. If we zoomed in on that, it might look a little bit pushed, and conversely we can push it the other way, so we could go for quite a blurry looking image. Again, double tap it, that resets us to the center. What I'm going to do is just get a little bit of clarity just on these, just to enhance the kind of stones in the foreground a little bit. Not going to worry too much because we've got some sharpening to do as well. And what we might do is just increase the vibrance a little bit more, just to push the colours a tiny bit, or we could take them the other way and make it a really, really kind of slightly washed out high key image. And again, this can be personal creativity playing its part here. So I'm actually going to take vibrance quite the opposite. I'm going to take it to the left, maybe the way I wouldn't take it, and wash it out a little bit. We'll then move down. And what I tend to find that if I've done my white and my black points and set them well, I don't often need to do a great deal on working with the tone curve. But again, as you would in Photoshop, you can pick your point which corresponds to different colour and light tones in the image and drag it up and down, and you'll see how it'll affect the image. I'm not actually going to do anything on that at the moment. Going to move down to our HSL, Hue, Saturation, Luminance area, where we've also got colours, and we've also got an ability to quickly flick the image to black and white and see if it works as black and white. Now, I'm liking this image as a colour, but what I might want to do is specifically target one colour. Now we can choose any of the sliders here, as we've done any other slider in Lightroom. Click it and move it left or right. Left to decrease saturation, right to increase. Same on hues, left to decrease, right to increase, and again same on luminance. So you've got to be careful which one you affect. Saturation is obviously the depth of colour. The luminance is how it's affected and how it plays with the light, and its hue, it tends to be its warmth or the actual tone of the colour, so you've got to be careful which one you do. Now what I'd perhaps like to do here is just take a little bit of the kind of saturation out in specific tones. Now instead of actually using the sliders, what we can use here is a targeted adjustment tool, and if we click that, we get a target. And then we hover over the image, and if we keep a look on this side here while I'm hovering, you'll see that whatever tone I'm hovering over, that it actually shows us that tone on the actual picker. And once we find the tone we want to work with, so I'm going to kind of lower the blues a little bit, press my left mouse button, hold it, and then if we wanted to increase the saturation of the blues, we'd move the mouse up. If we wanted to decrease, again, we'd move it left, move it downwards. So again, I'm just taking some of that saturation out, so that's the blues. And what I might decide is I want to take some out of the kind of reddy purples. So I hold my left mouse button, and I drag the mouse down. We could go all the way and almost do a selective colour, but you've got to keep it looking kind of realistic. So just in line with how much I've dialed the blues back, I'm going to do very similar on the reds. I'm just going to lower them that little bit. Yep, I think we're happy with that. That again created as quite a nice pastel-y looking image, and which I think works well with kind of the bleakness of the actual view. Right, what we can do then now is we move down again in the slider. Here we've got split toning, which you might use for black and white images. Don't tend to use it very often with colour, but again, if you're feeling creative, you might have an instance where you do actually want to use it and affect the highlights and the shadows with different colours in different amounts. We then move to one of the very important points of Lightroom in the basic panel, which is our pre-sharpening. This is where we're sharpening the raw file. What we've got here in the detail section is the ability to do sharpening. We affect the radius of it, the detail amount, and we can mask out. Now there's a number of different settings that different people use. What I tend to do is that the radius I tend to drop down to 0.5, just so it's kind of a bit like the softness of your brush in Photoshop. It's a little bit less aggressive pixel to pixel. And I'll then sharpen the image, looking at it as a whole, but also thinking about areas on the image which I know I specifically want sharp. And if you've got a specific area, this window here, we can grab the little crosshair target tool, and we can hover over and select the area we want to see in there. So I'm going to select this area of stones down there, so we can see how the sharpening is also affecting that area as well as the whole image. And then I'm just going to sharpen the image. And again, if you go too far, it can look pushed. If you take everything off, it can look very blurred. So it tends to be on an image by image basis, looking for a setting that works for you and works for your specific image. I think we're going to about 76 in this instance. But one thing we know about sharpening when we visually look at scene, that yes, rocks, sand, buildings, people have definite lines, would be sharp to our vision, but sky and water would be smooth. And what we'll want to do here is not apply the sharpening universally, but actually apply it selectively. Now we could paint this in using the adjustment brush, but the simplest way to do it is to actually use your masking tool in sharpening. And again, if we hold Alt down before we click this masking tool, and then click the masking tool, the screen goes white. White, as in Photoshop, white to apply. So this means we've applied sharpening to everything in the image. Now if we move the masking tool to the right, we'll see black areas come in. What the black means is there's no sharpening applied to that area. So I'll move this slider until sharpening is taken off everything I want it taken off. Now I'll keep it just on the edges of the clouds just to bring those out, but you'll see that the majority of the sky and the water in between the horizon and the near beach has got the black in it. So that means we've removed the sharpening from there. We then let go of both, and that applies the sharpening only to the selected areas, so the sky won't be sharpened, and we can zoom in and have a close look at that, and the water won't be sharpened, although some of the finer detail may be. We then move down again, and if we've got an image that was maybe taken at higher ISO or later in the evening and noise would be an issue, we can apply noise reduction, both luminance, colour and detail in here. We do find that this counteracts the sharpening, and you will lose detail, so it's a case of using it sparingly, and I do sometimes find that noise reduction is better applied using a brush, so you can be very targeted with it. We then move down again, and we see we've come past our lens corrections that we've already set, so that's my point, that maybe that should be higher in the process, and we can start to apply lens effects. So we might want to kind of bring the viewer and train their vision on a certain part of the image, so we could actually add a little vignette to the image, darken the edges a little bit, really add to the bleakness of it, and draw the viewer into the image. I quite like that now. It draws the image in, draws the viewer in, it accentuates these lines, but also very slightly accentuates that kind of lone, blurry person. And it also brings out that kind of light that's being picked up off the waves as well. So I'm very good, I'm very happy with that. I'm going to work with that, I think. Now what we can also do, so if we move back up to the top, is we can actually do some editing on a very quite a targeted approach, almost like what we would have done in Photoshop in the past. We've got a number of options. We've got a spot removal tool, which can be great for dust spotting or removing annoyances in the image. So I'll zoom in and say this stone was a piece of rubbish and we didn't like it. We can click on the spot removal tool. We use the size slider to increase or decrease the size of our target area. Now in the past you clicked and it was a round area. Now we can actually paint with that to make it very targeted, so we can actually afford to have the brush, almost a brush, much smaller. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this stone. So we hold my left mouse button on and I almost paint with this tool. So I'm just going to select that rock there, and what Lightroom does is it looks around the picture, samples pixels nearby and looks for pixels and tones which are very, very similar in size, and it replaces that. We click done and we can see the effect it's had. It's removed that big stone and made it look on the whole a little less distracting in that area. And again, we could do that any number of times across our image. We could even remove the person if we really wanted to, but for me they're quite important. But what we do know is we've also got some quite aggressive water spots on the camera or on the lens, so what we might want to do here is increase the size of the brush and zoom out a little bit here so I can see what I'm looking at. And what I might want to do now is I paint over that blurry area that the water droplet on the lens has created. And again, what Lightroom does is it assesses the area, it assesses the pixels, and it tries to find as good a match as possible. And that's where it can become tricky, because obviously lining the pixels up, but if we grab that we can move it around. We find one that we're happy with. Obviously you could be quite precise if you're doing the editing and really taking your time over it. We've got another one down here, so we might want to remove that one as well. Sometimes if you've not got dead straight lines, they're often much easier to remove, and we see that one's really, really simple to remove. But again, unless I point it out to you and I tell you about it, actually it's not that noticeable, and that's the key thing to remember with any editing. You want to keep it as unnoticeable as possible, but do as much as you would like or need to do or want to do to create your vision. But the key is that people don't look at your image and say, oh, that's been heavily edited. That's what we don't want to do. We want to keep it looking nice and natural. So we've done the dust spotting. What we might also want to do using these, obviously we've touched on the crop tool for sizing, etc. Another thing that we might find interesting here, if we click on the crop tool again and we see it places a grid overlay, we can actually change this overlay by pressing the O key on our keyboard into different styles of overlay, and these can be used to assess the composition based on different kind of compositional techniques or theories. So we've got the golden ratio, we've got looking at it in terms of different image sizes, we've got a really fine-tuned grid, which was like the one we used for leveling the horizon, we've got the basic grid, we've got triangles, and again we've got sort of slightly offset thirds. So we can apply different positional techniques on the image, both in camera, but importantly we can look at the image and assess how we like what we've done editing it actually using compositional techniques on the computer as well. So I'm going to go back to the base one because we're pretty happy with that anyway. We then come out and look across. We've got the red eye removal tool. Now we're not going to be using this on landscape at all, and to be fair, most fairly balanced cameras now with a diffused flash don't create too much red eye, so I don't think it's a tool I've used very often at all. Next one of real interest is the graduated filter tool, and this is great for either creating custom vignettes where you can drag it in at the corners, or for darkening areas or lightening areas, or applying an effect. So pretty much anything that we've done as we've worked down the panels, you can apply it on a graduated basis. We click the tool and we drag it where we want it. So what we might decide is, well, actually we started off at fairly high key, but actually want fairly dark. Thing to remember, if I don't hold the shift key down, I can move this graduated tool pretty much any angle I want. If I hold the shift key down, it keeps it straight. So what I'm going to do in this instance is drag it down to, so the midline touches, so we've got 100% at the top, 50% here, 0% here. I'm going to put the midline on the horizon. What I might want to do is kind of lower the exposure possibly of the top. So we might decide, well, I'm going to darken that and make it really moody. If it doesn't work, what we've done, we double click it, reset it. What I might do is I might decide I want to actually increase a tiny bit of clarity on these clouds. Again, just to make them really stand out and pop. Again, that can be done, so that applies it more at the top, less at the bottom. I might want to take some more sharpness off the clouds. That again, that's easy done. But I might actually want to kind of just affect the highlights in the cloud area. So we click a left mouse button on the highlight slider, and we can affect that very targeted in the sky. We can take it quite really all the way back if we wanted to, so it's a really, really balanced image. We could go excessive the opposite direction. So I think what I'll do, I'm going to keep it, we've just used this as an example, but I think I'm going to keep it as it is. I'm very happy with what we've done on this. So we can close on there. What you can do is you can add a new one, so you can add multiple grads in, as I say again, to kind of create your own vignette in very specific manner on the image. I'll click close on that. We come across now, we've got two more tools. The Radial Filter tool is a new one that's been applied to Lightroom. Very good tool. It allows you to select an area of an image. So we might say, well, let's select the mid area of the image. We select the size, we move it across, and then we can really kind of hone our shape and our size in. And what we might want to do here is affect kind of the brightness of this puddle or this pool here, and really create quite an exciting little bit of emphasis here. And what we're looking to do is create areas in the image where we draw the viewer's eye to. Now I might want to put some extra light into here. So if we invert the mask on here, this means that the effect we put on will apply inside instead of outside of the circle. And what I might want to do is kind of just kind of bring the exposure up a tiny bit, and then raise the highlights a bit, and we might even raise the shadows again just a little bit. And what we've done here, if you can see, is we've actually very targeted at this area of the image, so we're helping to shape where we want the viewer to look at our image, and it still looks very natural. So again, we've got these nice strong leading lines leading to this area of light, which kind of mirrors the light in the sky, so the viewer's coming into the image through the light into the sky, and then they're actually seeing the kind of this little very ambiguous figure, which has just that little bit of extra interest, and then almost creates it a full circle, so that into the image round, and keeps them roughly in the area where you want the viewer to have their eye. And that's one of the interesting ways you can use this radial filter tool. Again, you can darken areas, you can add extra contrast, extra sharpening to specific areas in just the same way. So that's, and it works in a very, it's very uniform, it creates a shape, and it works either inside or outside of it. If we wanted to be a bit more targeted, what we can do is we can choose a brush tool, and this is like working in Photoshop, and it's pretty much like dodging and burning. And what we can do here is we can actually create or paint in effects using this brush tool. So I'm just going to take the size of the brush down a little bit, and what I might decide to do is just to increase the contrast or a little bit of brightness in this area in between the lines. So I'm going to paint first, I'm going to paint myself a mask on. So I'm going to choose that one there, that one there, that one there, that one there, up here as well, there, a little bit there, a little bit there, a little bit there. So we've now painted a mask on. If we hover over here, it shows us where we've painted. So we can see a rough idea of what we've actually painted onto the image, and if we think we've missed a bit we wanted, we can make a reference of where that was. And I can come on and paint that on extra, and hover back over again and make sure that I've actually painted in what I want to do. Now what I might want to do here again is raise the highlights and the shadows on that area, just to add a little bit of interest specifically. So I'm going to raise the shadows here on that area. If you push it too far, you'll see it looks unnatural, and this is the key with any editing on any program software that you use, is it's got to look natural, so you've got to do it very targeted. I'm going to move it gently, and again I'll increase the highlights a little bit in there, if we go too far it can look unnatural, so it's just raising it a little bit to create that little bit of visual interest and a little bit more contrast in areas we want it. I think I'm happy with that, so I'll click done. If we wanted to create a new brush and paint a different effect in somewhere else, equally so, we click new, we can reset all these, and we can create a new brush. So we could add some extra darkness to these clouds if we really wanted to. In this instance I'm happy with what we've done, so I'll click done. I've got to the end point on this image that I wanted to, and we've used all the tools we want. So now the final thing for us to do, because if we think we've mapped the image so we know where it is, what I might want to do is give the image a title. So I'll go back to my library module, and I'll scroll down to the metadata section, and I'll give it a title, and we shall call it Sands End Solitude, a reference to this single person kind of wandering on a very peaceful Sands End beach. We could add detail into the caption section, and we could put the image creator's name in here, and I always check the copyright status so people know it's copyright. You could put the creator's name in here, etc, etc, and this is the one label where I always put an email address in so people can get in touch with me. I go back to develop, just check we're happy with everything. If we are, I then go to file and export. Now this is the only point where we actually create a physical output JPEG image. It's going to export it to a hard drive. We can change that, but I'll work with the hard drive. I tend to always do, and then if I want to do something of a purpose with it afterwards, I will do. we can send it to the same folder as the original, or you might have a folder created for processed images for a year and you can put them in there, and by clicking that you can choose your specific folder. So I'm going to put it in the same one. Don't want a subfolder, we don't want to specifically add it to a different catalogue or anything like that. What I might want to do now is, as well as it being named in metadata, I want to rename or give it a name to the actual output file that it creates. So I'm going to call this, as we said, Sans End Solitude. We put that in there, we click done. So that'll be called sansendsolitude.jpg. We scroll down, we can choose our output format, so it could be a JPEG, a PSD, a TIFF, a digital negative, or we can keep it as a RAW for now. If it's going to be used for print, you always want to make sure your quality is high. Keep your colour space is quite an interesting one. Most places, labs who take stuff in for print will want it in sRGB, and screen will take that as well. What Lightroom tends to work in is what they call Pro Photo RGB, this bottom one, but it actually has a much wider colour space than sRGB. So you will actually see slightly different effects on your edited image as you might see on your screen, and this is again raises the importance of having a calibrated screen. And if you're going to be printing your own stuff, soft proofing it to see how the image will appear on different types of paper, because different papers have different absorbances and luminosities and actually affect the way the image appears. But if we're going for screen, we don't need to worry too much about that, so I'm going to have this at 100%. You might lower that if you wanted to. You can resize the long edge of the image to a certain size. I always have my resolution for most files set to a good high level at 300, but again, if it's going on the web and you don't want anybody stealing the image, that could be as low as 72. We've not done any output sharpening at the moment. The sharpening we did earlier was pre-sharpening. What we might want to do is sharpen the images now for output. Now, this is where we're sharpening for purpose, and this is another reason why we always create virtual copies. So different purposes require different sharpening. Now, Lightroom's pretty reasonable, but it doesn't have masses of choices. We can sharpen for screen, matte paper and glossy paper, and by different amounts. So we're going to sharpen this for screen and by a standard amount. In another podcast, I will actually demonstrate how we use Nik Sharpener Pro on their output sharpening. Is a lot more detailed, and not only can you sharpen it for an immense amount of papers, but also you can think about viewing distances as well, which can be very, very important. But for most users, Lightroom sharpening will be just fine. So I'm going to sharpen it for screen by standard amount. We can put watermark on if we really wanted to, so this is where it applies like an opaque watermark over the image, and we can go into that and design it as much as we want. And we can also tell Lightroom what we want to do afterwards. I tend to leave it at do nothing, but you can tell it to kind of open the picture or show containing folder. I'll leave it at do nothing. Once you're happy with all your settings in here, and the thing to remember is you put some settings in now, we'll export. Next time you go back in, those settings will be the same. So actually, if you've resized something specifically for, say, a camera club competition to a certain amount of pixels on one edge, remember that you've done this next time you come back in, as you could end up exporting a picture that's for print and have it set to a size for specifically showing something like a program like image comp. Just something to be aware of. So I'm happy with everything, and I click export. And this, at this point, once Lightroom does its fantastic jiggery pokery, this is the first time where we actually have an exported file. We can go into, if you're on Windows, you can go into my computer and actually view it, or I can have a little look around and see where I've put it to on my Mac. So I've gone back to the same folder that we brought it in from, and if I double click it, let's see, here's now our exported JPEG image file. And that's the first time in the process we have an exported file. Just a couple of final pointers before we finish the podcast. A couple of things that you might find useful. This grey background here is set at mid-grey so you can assess the tones as you like them. You can change the colour of this background. And if you right click on the background, you can change it from anything from light grey, dark grey, medium grey we are now, to black or white. So if I set it white, you might find that the image doesn't seem as bright as it looks perceptually now. So again, sometimes that just helps us to actually assess an image. And if we set it at black, again it might look darker. We'll put it back to medium grey, personal preference. The other thing we can do is we can remove all distractions to look at the image and assess it, and we can do this at any point during our editing process to edit the image. And there's a couple of things here. We can go straight into a light box by pressing L on the keyboard. If we press it twice, it takes all the lights out. So we're just looking at the image. So now, no distractions, we can look at the image and decide if this is one we want to work with, or if we've exported it, if it's as we want. Press L again, takes us back to the screen as we were. What we can also do if we press the F key is it takes us straight beyond that, but also closes all the panels down as well, so the image then becomes perceptually bigger on screen. So it's lights out and panels gone by pressing the F key, and we've now got a much larger image, and we can look at it and again assess it and decide if we like it. Press the F key again, it takes us back in. So that's L to put your lights out, F to in effect go full screen with lights out. And just a quick way of doing it is you can drop your panels away on the arrows here. You can do that on absolutely any of the panels. Again, you tend to want these panels to work with. So I tend to leave them on and just use the F key when I want to take it away. There we go. The other thing, final check on now, is we've got our history panel here, and as well as being able to edit and undo, we can actually go back to any state, and if we hover over, we'll see within this box here it shows us the state of the image at that point. So we could go all the way back here to before we've put any of these brush strokes in if we decide we didn't like them, or we can come back to it. So again, it's a really fantastic non-destructive editing tool, Lightroom, and if you follow a nice simple basic workflow, if you're not talking and wittering over it like I am, you can edit a photo in anything between 5 and 15 minutes for a nice, easy, simple photograph and get very excellent results. Thank you for listening in. This has been Rob from RK Photographic with our basic Lightroom workflow podcast.